Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to a special episode of OpenShift TV. We are joined by Tyler Auerbach. We're going to be talking about avoiding deprecations and preparing for upgrades with Open Policy Agent. Tyler, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us what you do here. Tell us what we're going to talk about today, and we'll dive in.
Yep, absolutely. So, hello, everybody. Tyler Auerbach, architect with Red Hat Open Innovation Labs, focusing mostly on kind of site reliability engineering type work, which is what led me to a lot of this. You know, I'm out in the field working with a lot of customers, and a lot of times, as much as we'd like to have folks who are, kind of remaining with the latest upgrades, the latest versions,
Sure.
we realize that that tends not to happen. Sometimes there's some skipping involved, and as we know, deprecations roll through with every version, and sometimes you don't always catch them.
Right. Yeah, they don't always make the news, like Docker Shim or something to that effect.
They're not all big shiny things. Sometimes it's just a small little release note about what's going wrong. So I found myself in this position enough that I, of course, as I tend to do, reached out to the Great Bluebird site for help. I said, hey, there's got to be someone working on this. There's got to be somehow we're capturing this where it's an actionable thing that we can kind of you leverage as part of like a CI/CD process, or let's catch this before it becomes a problem, right? And as it does, sometimes good, sometimes bad, you got some information back. So said SOS, someone sent help. What are folks doing to take care of this? And as he tends to do, Duffy Cooley reached out. It's like, hey, this is a cool website. Or this is a cool repo. Go check this out. So at that point, took a look at this little project called Deprecate, which was capturing all of the information from the Kubernetes release notes, and it was capturing them at policy as code. It was using Rego from the Open Policy Agent project.
Nice.
And it was capturing that type of information, but it was making it actionable. You could fail. You could use that policy and fail it if it was of a certain version. Hey, you're using this API version, and you don't want it. It's not available anymore. It's gone. It's disappeared into the ether, right? We deprecated it. So you can use it. You can, just like the rest of your code, rather than having to do something at runtime, you can leverage that policy as code to take a look at the manifests, the Helm charts, the pure YAML, to take care of that. So so using Rego, I was able to start taking a look at the things I want to deploy and matching it up against with these policies and seeing what fell out. And I found that a lot fell out because YAML. One thing that I've I personally have been victimized by YAML. I've lost probably weeks of my life to YAML at this point.
Yes.
At this point.
I used to call myself a calendar-driven YAML engineer, right? Like,
exactly.
Very much have wasted a lot of time.
Yep, exactly.
What's seen with YAML.
So the thing that so there's a missing piece though. It's like I don't need to run open. I don't want to have to run Open Policy Agent as part of my kind of pipelines just to be able to try to enforce these things. So the missing piece kind of fell into place. I think this was maybe KubeCon 2 years ago or so now. Time's weird in COVID times because I don't remember when things actually. The last time I saw real people, right?
Yeah.
So it was maybe 2 years ago, and I saw this tool called Conftest. So I was able to use this. I was able to take that Conftest tool, take the Rego policies and just say, hey, Conftest, use these Rego policies against these manifests, these charts, and tell me what goes wrong. And I was able to start pulling them together. And I was like, cool, okay, I've got all the pieces now, right? So I've got my policies. I'm able to capture all my deprecation policies in these policy files. I've got my Conftest tool that allows me to take action with those policy files, and I've got my applications, my YAML that I want to deploy. So bringing that all together, I was like, cool, I'm gonna, as one does in open source, I showed up with a bunch of duct tape and wrapped all these things together and said, hey, cool, now I've got a thing that works. And the great thing about that is that a handful of us were also all looking at the same problem at the same time. Right. So I started looking at it from hey, I'm going to use this deprecate repo that this person's already publishing all these policies for me. I'll use them. And I'll use Conftest. It's already been put together to be able to take action on that.
Right.
And I published a little blog on it, said, hey, this is a cool thing I did. I was using GitHub Actions at the time. And look, I can check this. Anytime I check in code, I can check against these policies to see what goes wrong. And at the same time, Steve Wade, shout out to Steve Wade, was also kind of cranking on the same thing. And he had started building on top of this because it was that original Deprecate repo was only available up to a certain version of Kubernetes. And it was kind of getting long in the tooth at that point.
Yeah.
So he kind of took that ball and kept running with it and published these to a repo called Deprecation, which we'll take a look at here in a little bit.
Cool.
And again, the great thing for me was this was all just open source out in the wild. I don't need to maintain this myself. I just pull that in as a resource and it's available to me, right? So I'm getting these things for free for me. And I'm able to just rely on them. So part of me was like, oh, cool. So I can use this for my personal project, but then thinking bigger picture here is I can then rely on I can set my policies for my team. I can then as at an enterprise kind of organization level, maybe a bunch of other teams also have their policies that they want to enforce. Hey, we don't want anyone to try to use ingress objects. We're running on OpenShift, so it has to be a route. Don't go the ingress method right now because it doesn't do all the things we like to do with it, or that's not the thing that we're monitoring. So let me blockade it. So it doesn't even need to be just about deprecations, right? Your organization can, rather than it just being some line in a Word doc somewhere that says you must follow this rule, they can make it an actionable thing. They can put it into a policy, and then as part of a release cycle, you may get through your release cycle. Hey, everything looks good from my perspective. Now you publish your artifact or whatever to another group. It runs through their policies, and then you check your gates. Hey, I'm into production because I've checked X, Y, and Z policies. Mm-hmm. So it kind of like expands into this. Hey, I can really set any kind of rules that I want, and as long as I can take to kind of inspect the YAML for it and match it up, I'm in good shape. Yeah. So it was great because I just showed up with the duct tape and wrapped all these things together. Like I didn't need to do a lot of work. I just put the pipeline together and pulled in all the resources. So it was really cool because then I was able to really really get going, because now it wasn't we're moving from OpenShift 4.1 to 4.4 or something like that, because it's always like no one wants to be on the bleeding edge when they're doing things. It's like, let me just hopscotch a few of these, and that's always fun. But between those, there are the breakages that we talk about, these deprecations. So yeah. I was able to rely on the stuff from the deprecation repo from Steve. Then we got excited about it, started talking about it in the in our communities of practice here at Red Hat. And I said, hey, this is a cool thing that I'm seeing over here. We should do the OpenShift version of that, because we have our own API version deprecations, and hey, we're not going to use these things anymore. Moved group API groups and stuff like that around in the early 4.x release cycle. So we started doing a group of folks started publishing a bunch, and not just deprecation stuff. They started doing best practices. So again, this is all just like using the Rerun policy to define your policies, using Conftest to kind of like check those, and really enforcing best practices. So things that you want set in your deployment configs and your routes and things like that. So it balloons, right? You can your imagination is kind of the barrier here. Like you can set it to do anything.
Yeah, it's really powerful in that way that you can, and enforcing policy as code will always be more effective than any kind of documentation, right? Exactly. Like any kind of run book, any kind of anything. If you're doing it as code in the environment, it will be done.
Yep, exactly.
Sometimes whether you like it or not.
That was really my big goal, is because at the same time we were looking at all this Rego policy stuff, Jordan Liggett, I believe his last name was.
Oh yeah, I know Jordan.
He was working on kind of embedding that in the kubectl tool, right? So he now when you go to deploy something, kubectl apply, you'll get a warning saying, hey, you're using an outdate, this thing's going to be deprecated in version 122 or something like that. So that was being built into the runtime kind of tooling, and at the what we wanted to do was kind of make it be able to use for kind of all purposes, not just kind of like at runtime or just through the CLI tool. We wanted you to be able to plug that in anywhere you wanted, and that's what Rego kind of allowed us to do. So nowadays you have multiple ways of doing that. Whether if you're just hacking around, it's built into the tooling, you can see that. But instead of having to kind of like orchestrate kubectl commands in your pipeline, you can use the Conftest, you can use the Rego policies and get it done. So multiple ways to get the same thing done, but it gives you some options.
Nice, very nice. So you want to show it off?
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Right, enough talking about
magic screen share music or some sort.
All right, so
and folks, if you can't read what's on screen, let us know.
Yes, please let us know. This is a best guess right now. So created a project here. We see that we've got nothing running. And the only thing that I've done kind of like, behind here in the shadows is I have Tekton up and running. So if you look at OpenShift pipelines, we'll see that we've got all of our Tekton stuff running. Mm-hmm. So that's all. That's kind of like all that's already been done, kind of pre-cooked. That's the magic, right? So we've got our an empty project here. The first thing we want to do is, and I'll make sure we get these links out here. But I've got a repo, it's called Deprecohno, which just has
that'll be easy to find. I'll get it.
Yep. So we've got our my app that we're going to be taking a look at. It's just my usual test HTTP echo from HashiCorp that I use to say, hey, this thing's running. So it's a simple app. We've got a few things out there, and I've got one that's using the old V1 Beta 1 RBAC stuff. Just a bunch of nonsense YAML for us to test against right now. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we'll take a look at the OCP stuff here in a little bit. Really kind of the juicy, interesting part of this is the Tekton stuff. So in Tekton, you have tasks, that allow you to do things. You provide the right parameters, and it'll take the right actions. Ones we pulled down are just the git clone and the Conftest to be able to run our Conftest pieces as part of our pipeline. Made the only difference from the Conftest that is in this repo with the one that's out there on Tekton Hub is I just added an additional workspace, because I tend to not want to shove. I want to be able to pull policies from all over the place. I don't want to necessarily just have to rely that I've pulled them into my own repo.
Sure.
There's a way that you can just use the upstream one and do it that way, but that requires some git submodule magic, and
just get submodules scared.
So I'm not gonna lot. I've lost many, a lot of sleep to get submodules in the past, so I avoided them on this one. But that is our kind of our dummy repo, and as all good side projects, not a lot in the README, but I'll make sure that I push my actual README up there if you want to follow along and play around with this afterwards. So that's the dummy that we're working against. If we'll take a look at the pipeline here in a second, which is kind of like I test with YAML, so I won't spend too much time there, but we'll take a look at that. I mentioned Steve Wade. He's got this deprecation repo out there called Deprecation right there. And as I mentioned, it's just a bunch of policies. So for each version of a Kubernetes release, we've got a bunch of kind of you'll see deny. So there are two types of well, there's probably more than two, but the two frequent kind of Rego policies you'll see is there's a warn, which is just the warning, and the other ones are deny, which is, hey, I will fail. I'll actually return like an error code from Conftest and show you this, the messages in red versus the messages in yellow type thing. Nice. So some of these are in their actual deny policies. If you look at the more recent ones, 122 I think has the ingress one, right? Yeah, so 122 you'll see a bunch of these warning messages. So this is what kind of makes up a Rego policy. Is you have your action, the message you would like to show. If you're looking, this is just we're just kind of storing the the objects that we want in there. This could be anything. I could call this like ABC equals, XYZ. This is the things that I'm actually looking to take action on. And then it's always input dot something. So it's input dot, and then you start creeping down your YAML tree. So you can see here, I'm looking for API version. So if I see that, API version is, admission registration, I then say, hey, if any of, for an API version that matches this, if my kind is any of these kinds up here, show this message. So that's really kind of the building blocks of a Rego policy. So we won't spend too much time on the specific ones because there are plenty of kind of deprecation policies that have been out there. But this repo has all the ones from 116 the whole way up through 122, release that will be coming out. And a few other useful ones. So think service accounts where they started moving things around, things of that nature.
Nice.
So this is the main kind of Rego policy repo that I work with and that we'll be showing off today. There are a few other ones I mentioned. Our Red Hat COP Rego policies repo, which is useful. And if we have some extra time left over, I'll show you a cool one that I have cooked up that allows you to not just look at deprecations, but also allows us to work with the OpenShift install config for an IPI installation. So those are the three kind of Rego policies that we'll be working with.
Cool.
So if we, again, Deprecohno, take a look at our app over here. So we've got Tecton, we've got our tasks, let's see, project, just to make sure we're in the right spot. I'll go ahead and apply these two because we're not working with the Helm chart quite yet. So we've got our tasks. Remember, tasks are, for those not familiar with Tecton, tasks are the building block of a pipeline and are kind of like the blueprints. So rather than me creating a Conftest or a git clone for every single time I want to run it, I can just put a task out there, allow myself to provide some parameters to it, and I can just use that over and over again in my pipeline. So in our pipelines, you'll see I've got two here. One is the pipeline and one is the pipeline run. Pipeline is the actual content. These are the things that I want to do in the order that I want to do them. Go ahead and run it. A pipeline run is an instance of a pipeline. And I've got a pipeline run out here because the thing that I wanted to be able to do, which is the dynamic PVC, isn't available through the OpenShift UI yet. So I'll kick things off from the command line here, but we'll try to keep follow it through the UI, which is a bit easier on the eyes than our pipeline or our YAML here. So quick look at the actual pipeline though. So you can see here at the top, I've got some parameters that I would like to use, just things like repos that we're going to use, where I provide the deprecation repo, the application repo that we're working against. So those are, and the versions that we want to work with. Workspaces are how we share the data between each of the steps in our pipeline. So you'll see, I've got something for deprecation where I store all those Rego policies. I've got something for the COP Rego policies and our application data. So that's really just, hey, I'm going to run a step and I want to store some information off here so I can use it later on. And I'd like to break them out into multiple workspaces. That way I don't have a bunch of things maybe accidentally clobbering each other.
Nice.
Anything else to use? Yeah, so you'll see here in tasks, I just have a lot of git something, right? So this is all using that git clone task. Again, we're just referencing that and we're passing the parameters to it. So here I go off, I get get our deprecation policies, get our COP Rego policies, and get our app data. So it's all about, just collecting the resources that we are and making sure we have the appropriate versions, the latest of a certain tag or branch. And then we actually start doing things. So this is where I want to check my YAML against a deprecation policy. So we can see that I call out to Conftest. I give it the app source and my policy source because I have my app over here. I've got the upstream deprecation repositories. And I pass in a bunch of things. bunch of things. That's useful.
Bunch of things.
A bunch of things. I pass in the file names, so I pass in the app path to look at in our application repo. I pass in the policy, which is it helps build the path to the policy, so it's always Kubernetes version and then .rego. Nice. And how I would like to output it. So it just sends it to standard out. The important thing, because Steve and I have some differences on this, is the args. So when you're passing things to Conftest, it will only actually show a failure exit code if it shows the deny policy.
Got it.
A lot of the policies that are in that deprecation repo, they just throw warnings, which is good. If you want to be friendly to people.
Better than nothing.
Myself, I like to watch the world burn. I want to know, like, if something goes wrong, I want to know. Even if it's a warning, I need to stop right then. So Conftest has a nice flag that you can pass in. So you can pass in any of the Conftest flags, but the one that is important for my use case is fail on warn. So fail on warning, which even if a warning's thrown, it bombs out, and that causes the pipeline to fail, which is what I needed to do.
Right.
So obviously we need to make sure we get our policies first. So this is just me specifying, hey, run these 3 first and then run this thing. So it'll run Conftest after those 3 run, and it'll run it with those parameters.
Nice.
So with that being said, we can apply our pipeline, which this just makes the pipeline available in our cluster. The thing that actually will kick it off for us is this pipeline run. So here, this is just me supplying the values for those parameters that we had specified. It gives a reference to the pipeline that we're using, and it defines the workspaces that I've specified. Because I don't like kind of pre-baking PVCs, like I don't want to have to create the PVC. I just want it to dynamically spin up every time that I run this. Tekton has a concept of a volume claim template. So I can just say, hey, here's my volume claim template. I want it to have this access mode. I want it to be this big, and give it this name. So there, for every instance of a pipeline run, so if I run this pipeline run 3 times, it'll spin up with a kind of generated name, and it'll spin up new PVCs for each run of that, rather than trying to use the same PVC and potentially overwriting a bunch of my logs. Overwriting logs when you're troubleshooting, not that useful, I've found, which is why I've ended up in using the volume claim templates instead of the, hey, let me just create 3 PVCs that I use over and over again.
Nice.
Good. One thing to mention there is that the nice thing is then when you go clean up a pipeline run, so if I go OC delete pipeline run, it'll actually clean up those PVCs because it's owned by that pipeline run, instead of me having to manually go back and clean up all that stuff manually. So with that being said here, we'll go ahead and apply our pipeline run. We can see that it's created.
Cool.
We're over here now in our UI. I click on our pipelines. I'll go to the right one.
So
we'll see that we've got this.
Yeah.
So it should be, that's what it looks like. We see this pipeline run is running. So it runs fairly quick. It's just checking out the repo. So we can see that those 3 are already running.
Seconds,
I knew something would go
fail.
It always does. Oh wait, no, it's supposed to go wrong. It's broken. That's why. Yeah. So I've got our old, it's not supposed to pass the first time. I'm showing us why we want to use this, right? So we see that it failed. Good. Yeah, it says it failed on the Conftest and the log snippet. Hey, here's what happened. So we can see that Conftest is saying, hey, your myapt-role.yaml. It shows that message that we put in there. It says, hey, this is deprecated from Kubernetes 120. Use this instead. So we'll go ahead and pop this. So it shows us the warning message that we specified, and then it tells us how, basically the output of it. It says, hey, we had 10 tests, 9 of them passed, 1 was a warning, and because we've passed in the fail on warning flag, went ahead and failed it for us. So to fix this, we'll come back over here to our dummy repo, look in my app, and kind of just as I mentioned earlier, and as our message tells us, hey, we're running this old API version. It's deprecated. I want to, nope. I want to use this instead.
It's just going to work magically, right? Just
Yep.
magic.
Yeah, so it's just going to work. It's magic. We'll go ahead, say, okay, cool. I'm going to fix this. Fix API version, and we'll push. And then we'll go ahead and say, run back up here. Hey, go ahead and rerun this. Again, we're saying rerun, so it's going to, all those checkouts, it's going to get the latest version, which will pick up our last change. And ideally, if it works as supposed to, we should see everything turn green now.
3 greens. Next step. Come on now.
Yep.
You can do it.
Good.
I believe. There we go.
So we can pop in here. We look at our check deprecation policies. Now we see 10 passed, 0 warnings, all good. And now we're happy.
Nice.
So the great thing about this is, again, we're using this for API versions, but you could use this to beat up on any YAML that you want. We're using the policies that are specifically tuned for Kubernetes deprecations, but this could be anything you want. And you can make, obviously Tecton has a bunch of nice built-in things too, that you can expand these pipelines to, hey, I'm going to run my pipeline from, like I mentioned earlier, I can run my pipelines for my local policies. Then when I want to, then go to some other one, I could just have my pipeline that may kick off another pipeline in, the security team's kind of realm and say, hey, look, my thing's ready. Here you go. We're running this all kind of manually right now, but the way that you would do that is with a piece of Tecton called triggers. So you can trigger it based off of, check-ins, things to GitHub, or, you could just kind of like script out a bunch of trigger templates that says, hey, I'm going to go poke and prod this other pipeline that's in a cluster and do it that way as well. So a bunch of cool things that allow you to really tie all this together within Tecton and with Rego itself.
So if you're not familiar with Rego, where would you recommend folks go to learn?
So this is exactly, I had no idea what Rego was.
Right.
I got pointed there by Duffy and I was like, okay, cool. And a new thing, yet another new thing to learn.
Right.
And the great thing about Rego is on this Open Policy Agent website, they have probably some of my favorite documentation, right? Who has favorite documentation? But this was really good. Like it shows you what it is, what the purpose of it, and kind of the basics. And I believe I don't know if it's on this site or if they kind of like the originators of Open Policy Agent and Rego. I think it's Styra. I think they've got some labs on it as well. But I would definitely start with this policy language documentation if you want to take a look, get a feel for what it looks and feels like. And then there's definitely some labs available from different groups online that you can really, it gives you stuff to play with instead of you kind of having to invent your own. But yeah, this is definitely where I would start is on the docs is where I would go.
Absolutely. And I've dropped that link in chat so folks can learn that as they need to. Yeah, I know Styra has some labs. I know CNCF has some labs, maybe, I think.
Yep. Yeah, that's always my good fallback is like, I know if it's like a CNCF project, they've got something somewhere. I haven't used their stuff, but I know they've got it.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So this is definitely where I'd start there. Similar for Tecton. If you don't have a real good feel for Tecton, one thing, you don't have to use Tecton. You can use whatever your CI preference of choices. It works the same in Jenkins, Tecton. I started off using GitHub Actions. Like this will work anywhere that you can run Conftest. So I really like Tecton because it's kind of built in and I don't have to run a lot of extra things that I don't need. Hey, I needed just this pipeline and these 2 tasks and I'm up and running. I didn't need to go kind of orchestrate and build out my kind of Jenkins image. I didn't need to fool around in GitHub Actions and stuff like that. It was just all on my cluster, all controlled by me. It took a handful of minutes to kind of get the initial workings together to start testing this stuff out.
Nice.
One other thing I wanted to show, I said if we had some extra time here, is if we go back to our Tecton pipeline. As I mentioned, this doesn't just have to be a deprecation thing. This can be any YAML of our choosing. So yet another thing that I've wasted some time on is I'll go to deploy an OpenShift cluster, right? Installer provided infrastructure. I can just run OpenShift install, give it my install config, and poof, up in AWS comes a cluster.
Nice.
One thing that I tend to have some issues with is sometimes I'll just say, hey, I'm sure this region is something that I can use. And then I'll find out, nope, OpenShift wasn't supported in that version. And that was more like the initial 4.x releases, because we didn't initially support everything in every region. And that's fine. It was new. We were figuring it out. But that also meant that the installer ran for a good, for a portion of time before I realized that there was a problem for me to a sharp edge for me to run into. So I again went back to my favorite YAML abusing tool of Conftest and Rego and said, hey, I'm gonna not do that anymore. So we'll go ahead and update our pipeline here, and we'll go take a look at what I'm talking about here. So similar to how we have our deprecation repo with those policies, up through 4.5, I believe, I at least had, and so I've got to get 4.6 and 4.7, see if anything's changed there. But I created some Rego policies for the available regions in AWS. So if we take a look at that, we can see something similar to what we saw with our Rego policies. And again, I like to watch everything burn. I want the pain points because I want to know something's gone wrong. So I have a deny message, and I say, hey, these are all the supported regions for AWS as of OpenShift 4.1. I then said, hey, if the region in my input file doesn't match anything that I provided up here, I think I was writing this around Halloween. I would say that region's haunted, and throw in some ghost emojis. If you're gonna have error messages, make them fun, I always say. So threw those out there. So as we started to add more, they kind of built off of each other. So similar here is where we started. I think EU North 1, the one in Stockholm, I believe, was the one I always bumped into because we were launching a bunch of stuff in Stockholm at the time. So you can see that, hey, as of that, we see EU North somewhere in there. But similar thing. I'm just, I am running something against YAML, and here are my policies that I'm pulling in. So over in my pipeline, I've, similar to how we did our other, just go down here to the bottom, similar to how we checked out our policy code and then we ran Conftest, doing the same thing here with the same exact Conftest task that was already done, no modification needed. I'm providing different parameters to it, right? So instead of the Kubernetes version, I'm just saying, hey, look for OCP AWS and then an OCP version. And again, fail on warn, but I have deny messages, so we don't really need that. But just kind of kept it safe in case we needed to update that later. And then I just looked for my files under OCP in my app repo, which again, our app repo is just the test one here. So if we look at this install config, this is just the dummy example that they have out on the website, and you'll see that, hey, I've got EU North 1, which wasn't a thing at the time. Right. So if we want to if I want to just go back here and we'll rerun this again, I believe it should pick that up. Yeah,
there you go.
So we can see that these two are kind of running on their own because it doesn't need some of these other ones. And off these two go. And that's the I will admit, I am someone who likes to live in the terminal. So that failed as expected. I'm someone who likes to live in the terminal. So yesterday, as I was kind of demoing this out and making sure that everything still worked before we went live today, this is one of the first times I've used the console, the UI version of what this is. Usually, I'm just over here, using the CLI, looking at what's going on in the pod logs. Right. But I decided, hey, it's talking to people about this. It's easier to visually explain what's going on if you can see what's going on. And I will say this is a beautiful, beautiful UI for this. So thank you to the folks on the console team who threw this together, the pipelines team.
Yeah.
One thing to call out here too, because this was a conversation I was having yesterday. I mentioned how I like to use volume claim templates. In the UI, you can there's a pipeline editor. You can use a visual kind of UI to put together your pipeline. One thing that wasn't available though is you being able to use specify volume claim templates in the UI. Talking with the team, that's going to be available in 4.8. We're running on 4.7 right now. So in 4.8, that'll be available. So you'll be able to completely do everything I do here in YAML in the UI if that's your bag, if that's where you prefer to live. So coming soon. Look forward to that in 4.8, it sounds like. But
nice.
Back to the output here. So we click here. We see that, hey, we fixed our deprecation stuff. So that's still passing. But now we see our OCP region data is failing. And just as I mentioned, I was using EU North 1 in 4.1. That wasn't a supported region. And I get, hey, EU North 1's haunted. Move along. Nothing to see here. Ghosts. So again, the possibilities here with Conftest and Rego and pulling this all together with Tecton, really kind of endless. There's not a lot of code that you need to maintain because you can have the appropriate people who are specifying your policies, just publish them where you need to go, and you can pull them in that manner. You can publish your own, put them in your own repo, tuck it along right with your app to make sure that things remain the same. Test it that way, and it's all done with a pipeline and 2 tasks. It's just the git checkout one, the git clone task and the Conftest task. And that's all the duct tape required to really pull this thing together.
That's cool.
Which is, from my perspective, like, hey, I'm maintaining almost nothing at this point. I'm just wrapping it in a pipeline. Which
right.
was really great for me.
Yeah. I mean, and the fact that you can use kind of any tooling, right? Like not just Tecton, not just GitHub Actions and everything else, right? Like it can be an endless list of possibilities which you can test against and be
which
this will fail in the next version. Yeah.
It's its own separate problem, right? It's like there's so many options. I can do anything now. And it's like some people tend to
you can overdo it too.
I can put everything in a Rego policy, and then it's like now I can't deploy anything because there's too many policies.
Yeah, which policy broke my thing?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I like to break it up with different policies and different repos, because then it's not like, oh, all my policies are in here. One of these 100 broke it. I can say, okay, it failed from policies in this repo. How many repos? How many policies are in there? Oh, okay, it's just this handful of 10, 20. Okay, which one did act? What's the message? Let me look for the message.
Nice.
So there's also there's a strategy to making your policies easy enough to troubleshoot as well. Don't try to tie everything. People like to template things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I'm just going to have this one policy and I just feed a bunch of stuff into that. And it's like, okay, well, which thing did I feed into it that broke it? So word of the somewhat wise, don't do that, because I see that a lot, and that causes issues. Yeah. Like you mentioned, that's one thing it's really easy to go out and talk to folks that we're working with on these things, right? Because hey, any tool that you want, we can pull these upstream tools in and use it with your special brand of CI system, right? Anything you want, is going to be able to implement it, because we just need a Conftest CLI, some Rego policies, and some bubble gum to tape it all together.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And then the way you've implemented it, with fail on warn, that's going to definitely give some people, right, like some good feedback before they go to prod, right? Like that is, I think, wise. in my
Yeah,
opinion.
exactly. And one thing that I've seen before is when you're just doing your development kind of pipelines, hey, I'm checking in my code, triggers will kick things off and put it, put it into my repo. Okay, cool. If it was just a warning, yeah, let the developers keep on moving along. Let them get that in there. But then in the logs, like you can use Prometheus and your log stack, so Elasticsearch or anything like that. You can then start pulling in like, hey, I'm getting a bunch of these things. Hey, dev team, I'm just letting you know I'm seeing a lot of this. You're probably skipping over it because hey, your app is still getting into your dev environment. But just so you know, if you want to go to prod, like it's got to go fix it. So you don't put up blockers too soon, but definitely before you start getting into like your QA environments, your prod environments, like something's not in good shape, don't wait until the last minute. Don't go back to the old days where it's like you found out when it's being deployed that it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah. Don't. Yeah. Test first and test often.
Yeah, test first, test often, and that's what I really like about Tecton, right? Is it's kind of like it's made up of a bunch of pieces. Like you can bring in the triggers part of it, so it's not just I need to go to the command line and kick off a pipeline run. I can set up the triggers, and anytime that gets checked in, like off to the races, boom, and I can get informed on those types of things. Then you can start getting really fancy and go into Prometheus and start setting up alert managers. Like, hey, if you see this, start sending out messages and alerts and let people know. And then like I can go in and look at all the pretty graphs and say like, hey, I've got a bunch of deprecated things over here in this namespace. I should probably go talk to this team, or they should, ideally they're watching it and they can take a look at it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's the whole process of like which policies we should use, right? Like get your security team involved and like ask them, right? Like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Here's the list of things that it can cover. Does it cover all the things that we want to test against? If not, what do we need to write ourselves? Yeah.
And that's what I mean. There's a lot of cool things about this, but that's probably the one of the best things is it really gets the security team involved early rather than them being reactionary. They're kind of involved in the process, and it also gets everyone excited about kind of security and things of that nature, because now it's not just, hey, security team, write up your policies, we'll use them. Now it's like, hey, we're going to write some too that like safeguard us, but like give us yours too and we'll use yours. And it's just like everyone can help build.
Everybody jumps in the pipeline. Yeah, that's the DevOps GitOps dream, is that everybody's involved in the application delivery
instead
process.
Of it just being a bunch of silos, you get this kind of cross-functional collaboration, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, this is always like getting security involved early is always going to be a good thing, right? Like, I know it might seem painful at first for some folks, but when you show them that like, hey, we're actually trying to institute policy as code here, right? Like, let's work on this together as a team.
There's always like the old wounds that pop up when you first like, hey, you should, hey, get them involved, like invite them into your development process, let them know what you're doing. It's like, but then they'll see my secrets. They'll know what to look for. It's like, that's the good thing. They should know what you're doing. This is not bad. I get that you think that they're working against you, but you're all working for the same people. You're working for the same
You're
goal.
all pushing towards the same goal.
Like, the one team, one dream type thing, right? Like, hey, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. We all have some side quests that we're all on. We want to make sure X, Y, and Z because that's our goal as a team. But at the end of the day, you're all on the same team. Act like it.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things that we have to do in DevOps and any kind of organization, is just realize that we're all one big team, right? Like, yes, you might be over here in ops, and yes, you might be over here in dev, and yes, you might be over here in security, but you all have to work together.
Yep, exactly. And that's like a lot of times we're when we kick things off is in some of our labs engagements, it's like, okay, let's bring everyone together.
And oftentimes that's the first time everyone's together, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we're all in the same room. Like usually you're just a name on the other side of an email that's telling you bad news, right? It's like you get everyone in one room, you kind of talk through like, hey, here's the goal. We realize, maybe we've all got some scars from past interactions, but we want to do this thing. We are one team. Let's work towards this goal as a team. Let's all get involved. If you've got ideas and you want to kind of collaborate and experiment a little bit, this is the place to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, kick the tires, light the fires, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool, Tyler. This was awesome. Thank you so much for bringing this to us.
Thank you for giving me a chance. Like I said, like this is
no problem.
Something maybe over a year ago or maybe even longer than that we're playing around with. So it's good to finally be able to get in front of people and show this off, and hopefully this sparks some ideas and we can see what else comes out of it.
Yeah, that'd be great. As always, if you have feedback, let me know, short@redhat.com. And if you want more info on Rego and everything else, we've dropped the links in chat, but I will find them again real quick and redrop them in case you just joined. And anything else you want to recommend before we sign off here, Tyler?
No, that's all I got for today.
That's awesome.
As you mentioned, check those links out. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself. Just my name on Twitter is how you can find me. Easy, and I love talking about this stuff, so feel free to reach out. More than happy to chat.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Tyler, for being here. And we will see you all soon. Stay safe out there.